Ted Bundy's first escape and recapture. Ted Bundy's escape from the Pitkin County Courthouse. On June 6, 1977, whilst his restraints were removed, Ted Bundy escaped from the courthouse by jumping from a window. He injured his ankle jumping from the second floor, then removed his outer layer of clothing so he could slip through the Aspen roadblocks unnoticed. Whilst on the run, he managed to live off food he stole from local cabins and nearby campers and would sleep in ones that were abandoned. He later told investigators his first night had been spent sleeping in the rain, but then he found an unoccupied cabin on his second day, with a small amount of food, some warm clothing and a rifle. It was on this day that a woman and her baby had a worrying encounter with a man in a vehicle who first asked for help, and when it was refused, he became angry and threatened the woman, telling her he had been watching her and knew she was alone and her friends were not nearby. As she became frantic, her friend's hiking party came down from the mountain and the man drove off in a panic. After his recapture, the woman identified Bundy as the man who accosted her. Cold, with little money and in constant pain with his ankle, Bundy decided he needed to leave Aspen, but required a car to pass through the roadblocks. He finally found one with the keys left in the ignition, but when he tried to flee he was spotted by 2 police officers. After 6 days on the run, a very disheveled Ted Bundy was recaptured. He was recognized by police even though he was wearing glasses and had a band-aid over his nose. Back at the jail in Glenwood Springs, Bundy began to formulate a new escape plan. He obtained a detailed floor plan of the jail, and other inmates provided him with a hacksaw blade. Over the next 6 months he accumulated $500 in cash from visitors, and sawed a hole through the ceiling in his cell. He was able to slim his weight, losing some 16 kilograms, and was able to fit through the hole and into the crawl space above. Ted Bundy's second escape and freedom. Ted Bundy's escape from the Glenwood Springs jail. During December, he made several practice runs and no one at the jail investigated the noises made during these test runs. On December 31, 1977, Bundy placed his law books on his bed and covered them with a blanket to make it appear he was sleeping, then crawled up into the ceiling and made his way to another part of the building and found an opening that led to the closet of the jailer's apartment. He then sat and waited until he knew the apartment was empty due to the New Year's celebrations, and then casually walked out of the front door to freedom. His escape was not discovered until the following afternoon, more than 15 hours later, and by then he was already in Chicago, one of many stops on his way to sunny Florida. Bundy arrived in Tallahassee, Florida on January 7, 1978. He quickly found a room to rent at the Oak under the assumed name Chris Hagen, and told the landlady he was a student. He now had the freedom to roam the nearby campuses, which were his old hunting grounds back in Washington. Ted Bundy was now free in a place where nobody knew his identity or anything about his past, and he felt comfortable in his new environment at the nearby Florida State University, spending much of his time walking around the campus and occasionally taking classes unnoticed. He spent the rest of his spare time at his apartment watching his stolen TV, like everything else in his possession, much like he had done in the past, and purchased food using stolen credit cards. On January 12, Bundy stole the license plates from a 1972 Volkswagen camper near Dunwoody Street. He then stole an orange Volkswagen Bug from a young man named Ricky Garzaniti from 529 East Georgia Street. Ted Bundy and the Florida Murders. The Chi Omega murders committed by serial killer Ted Bundy. The Chi Omega sorority house at the University of Florida was quiet on the evening of Sunday, January 15, with most of the occupants either having gone out or retiring early to bed. At around 2:45 a.m. Bundy entered the sorority house and bludgeoned 21-year-old Margaret Bowman with a piece of oak firewood and then strangled her with a stocking. He then went to the room of 20-year-old Lisa Levy and beat her unconscious, breaking her collarbone. One of her nipples was torn off, she was bitten on the buttocks, then sexually assaulted with a Clariol hairspray bottle and strangled with a stocking. Moving into the adjoining bedroom, he assaulted 20-year-old Kathy Kleiner, breaking her jawbone and lacerating her shoulder, and then struck 21-year-old Karen Chandler, who suffered a concussion, lost several teeth because her jaw had been broken in 3 places. Bundy ran out of the house when he became startled by the headlights of a car which was dropping off housemate Nita Neary. These attacks were overheard by several of the other girls in the house, who alerted the dorm mother and notified the police that an intruder was inside the residence. Karen Chandler staggered out of her room and into the hallway, with blood seeping from a head wound. Then Lisa Levy and Margaret Bowman were found dead in their beds, having suffered gruesome injuries. Although they survived, Karen Chandler and Kathy Kleiner had suffered life-changing injuries. Ted Bundy escaped the scene and made his way to a basement apartment 8 blocks away, and there launched a final attack, this time on 21-year-old student Cheryl Thomas. She was found lying diagonally across her bed, her face turning purple with bruises and barely conscious, whimpering in pain. She had been beaten across the head and suffered a broken jaw and dislocated shoulder, whilst her skull was fractured in 5 places. Next to her body, police found a semen stain and a pantyhose mask which contained 2 hairs. Cheryl Thomas suffered the worst injuries that night and was left with permanent deafness and equilibrium damage, which ruined her dance prospects and would stay in hospital for a month. Ted Bundy kept a low profile after the murders at the Chi Omega sorority house, and on February 5 he stole a white Dodge van from the Florida State University Media Center and left Tallahassee for Jacksonville. Ted Bundy and the murder of Kimberly Leach. Ted Bundy's final act of depravity. Several days later, on February 8, he approached 14-year-old Leslie Parmenter as she waited to pick up her brother, Danny. Bundy told the young girl he was Richard Burton from the fire department and asked her if she attended the nearby school. Parmenter's father was the chief of detectives for the Jacksonville Police Department, who had told her many times not to talk to strangers. She soon began to feel uncomfortable and found it odd that an off-duty fireman would be wearing plaid pants and a navy jacket. Eventually her brother arrived and told Leslie to get in the car. He then followed the man and made a note of his license plates to give to his father. The next day, February 9, 12-year-old Kimberly Leach disappeared at Lake City, Florida. She had left one building of her school to go to another, where she retrieved her purse during first period. But on her return journey she was intercepted by Bundy, who was seen by a witness and later described Leach being led by an angry-looking man to a white van, and assumed it was a father with his daughter. Her body would eventually be found 2 months later. The day afterwards, Bundy's name was added to the FBI's top 10 most wanted list as fugitive number 360, with a $100,000 reward for information leading to his capture. At 10:45 p.m. that evening he revisited the crime scene at Dunwoody Street where the attack on Cheryl Thomas occurred. That same day he was mentioned, albeit unknowingly, by the BTK Strangler in his February 10, 1978 letter to KTV Channel 10. In it, the BTK killer mentions other serial killers who suffer from the same unstoppable urges he does, and listed several of these notorious killers, including Ted of the West Coast and the Pantyhose Strangler of Florida. Ted of the West Coast was a reference to Bundy's Washington, Utah, Idaho, and Colorado murders, and the Pantyhose Strangler of Florida comprised the Chi Omega and Kimberly Leach murders. Until that point, no one knew for certain that Ted Bundy was responsible for any of these crimes.
Somewhat candy, but a severed foot is the ultimate stocking stuffer. Merry Christmas, my dear.
The recapture of serial killer Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy and his last days of freedom in Florida. On February 11, he attempted to break into a Toyota not far from the Chi Omega sorority house but was spotted by a policeman. He managed to escape. Later that evening he treated himself to one last meal at the Chez Pierre in the Adams Street Mall, where he enjoyed French cuisine and wine, and paid for it with one of the stolen credit cards. In his last few weeks of freedom, Bundy had escalated his shoplifting sprees and thefts of wallets and had began to drink heavily. He sank into desperation and was no longer in control of his own actions like the old Ted used to be. He was spending excessively on stolen credit cards, making impulse purchases of clothing, and especially socks, for which he had a strong fetish and owned many pairs. He was now being sought all over America for the murders he committed at Chi Omega and soon discarded the white van which was seen by a witness at the Kimberly Leach abduction, and managed to obtain a new stolen car, an orange Volkswagen Bug, something he was more comfortable driving. On February 15, 1978, Officer David Lee was patrolling in West Pensacola when he saw the orange VW Bug driven by Bundy at 10 p.m. Knowing the area well and most of the residents, he knew he hadn't seen the car before, and a quick check on the license plates revealed they were stolen. He immediately turned on his headlights and began to follow the suspicious vehicle. Just as he had done in Utah, Bundy began to speed away and a chase ensued. However, this time he suddenly decided to stop and pull over. Officer Lee ordered Bundy out of the car and told him to lie down with his hands in front, but when he attempted to handcuff him, Bundy rolled over and kicked his legs from under him. As he managed to fight his way free and started to run, the officer fired his weapon. Bundy dropped to the ground and pretended he had been shot. When the officer approached him, he was attacked again and both men struggled over Lee's pistol, but he was soon able to overpower Bundy and then handcuffed him. Officer Lee was unaware of the man's identity he had just apprehended, and overheard his prisoner commenting, "I wish you had killed me." Little did the police officer know, he had just recaptured Ted Bundy. In his stolen vehicle, police found 21 stolen credit cards, 3 IDs belonging to female FSU students and a stolen television set. They also found the clothing he wore when he posed as Richard Burton, of the Jacksonville Fire Department. Bundy was taken to the police station and his identity was soon discovered by authorities. Under questioning he commented to interrogators, "I'm the most cold-blooded son of a bitch you'll ever meet." Almost 2 months later, the body of Kimberly Leach was found after 8 weeks of intense searching. Her remains were located in a pigsty at the Sewanee River State Park on April 7, 1978. It was believed she had been raped before her murder, but the cause of death could not be established because of the level of decomposition. Ted Bundy and the Chi Omega trial. Bundy would stand trial for the Chi Omega murders and assaults in June 1979. It was to be held in Miami and would be the first nationally televised trial in the United States, covered by reporters from around the world. Ted decided, once again, to represent himself, despite having 5 court-appointed attorneys to handle his defense. His own self-importance and misguided delusion of his own abilities contributed to the complete mishandling of his defense strategy. His defense arranged for a plea deal in which Bundy would plead guilty to killing Margaret Bowman, Lisa Levy, and Kimberly Leach, and in exchange he would receive a 75-year sentence. In his mind, Bundy thought he could agree and then file a post-conviction motion once the evidence was no longer of any use or the witnesses retract their statements. However, at the last minute he refused the deal, primarily because it would mean he would have finally admit to the world he was a murderer, something his ego could never allow. During the trial, several witnesses confirmed before the court that the man they saw at the Chi Omega house on the night of the murders was Ted Bundy. Nita Neary, whose arrival home during those early morning hours caused him to escape out of the house before he could attack any more women, identified Bundy as the man she saw, whilst Connie Hastings, a Chi Omega student, told the court she saw him in the vicinity of the house. There was also damning forensic evidence left at the crime scene which incriminated him, namely the bite wounds on Lisa Levy's buttock, which was matched to a mouth cast taken of Bundy's teeth by forensic odontologists Richard Souverin and Lowell Levine. On July 17, Bundy arrived late into court because she refused to leave his cell. At around 1 a.m. he had thrown an orange between the bars of his cell and managed to smash one of the lights outside. The jailers moved him to another cell, and during a search of his, they found broken shards of glass from the splintered light bulb hidden far back in the cell. When he was summoned to court, the jailers could not unlock his cell door and found he had jammed toilet paper inside the lock. When told he was due in court, Bundy replied, "I'll be there when I feel like it." They adjourned for deliberation on July 23, 1979, and spent almost 7 hours before returning a decision of guilty for the murders of Bowman and Levy. As he listened to the verdict, he showed no emotion. He was also found guilty of 3 counts of attempted first-degree murder, for the assaults of Thomas, Kleiner, and Chandler, as well as 2 counts of burglary. The judge, Edward Cowart, sentenced him to death plus 196 years for brutal murders. In summing up, Cowart said, "These killings were indeed heinous, atrocious, and cruel, and that they were extremely wicked, shocking, evil, and vile." Although he was sentenced to death by the court, Jude Cowart had been impressed with Ted Bundy's attempt to act as his own defense, and in his closing words commented, "You're a bright young man. You'd have made a good lawyer, and I would have loved to have you practice in front of me, but you went another way, partner." Ted Bundy and the Kimberly Leach trial. The next time Bundy was in court was 6 months later, when he was tried in Orlando for the abduction and murder of 12-year-old Kimberly Leach, believed to be his youngest victim. During the trial, Bundy called Carol and Boone, who had been in a relationship with Bundy since his incarceration, as a character witness. Also present were numerous women who attended court to get a glimpse of Bundy, who had garnered quite the female following in his notoriety. Boone had served as a witness for the defense at the Chi Omega trial, and Bundy asked her marry him in the presence of the judge, which constituted under Florida law as a legal marriage. But Bundy's show of theatrics could not save him from the prosecution, who presented the witness who saw Leach being led away from the schoolyard and into a white van. Ted Bundy was positively identified as that man, and microscopic fibers from his clothing matched those found on Leach's body. On February 10, 1980, after 8 hours of deliberation, Bundy was found guilty of the murder of Kimberly Leach and sentenced to death for a 3rd time by electrocution. This verdict resulted in the now famous picture of Bundy losing his temper and shouting, "Tell the jury they were wrong." He was sent to the Stark prison in Florida, where he began his sentence on death row as inmate number 069063. He occupied a cell on the 2 North Catwalk, and visitors to the prison would often ask to see him, something Bundy hated because he believed the prison authorities were treating him like a prison tour attraction. He would always receive more mail than any other inmate, around 20 to 30 letters a day from people all around the world. Most were from people who wanted a souvenir if he wrote back, but some were from women who professed their love and admiration for him, and even proposals of marriage. During his time in prison, he was assessed by numerous psychologists and doctors to ascertain why he perpetrated the crimes he was found guilty of committing. He was found to have matured intellectually and physically, but not emotionally, which resulted in both a passive-aggressive and an antisocial narcissistic personality, with hypergrandiose paranoia with severe ego problems. Experts found him to be a superb manipulator with an innate need to manipulate for his own benefit, and a sociopath with little to no conscience. His personality had 2 distinct sides: the real Ted, who was intelligent, polite, personable, charming, ambitious, and charismatic, and false Ted, who was devious, manipulative, a compulsive liar and sexual sociopath who had a fascination with sadomasochism and bondage and a need for hardcore pornography. Despite these traits, Ted Bundy was considered quite sane and carefully planned his murders before and afterwards, leaving little if any evidence in his earlier crimes. Bundy could talk for hours, especially about murder, and that is what he chose to do in March 1980 when he agreed to a series of interviews with journalists Stephen Michaud and Hugh Ainsworth, who were interested in writing a book. Ted Bundy and the death row interviews. Because Bundy refused to talk directly about the murders, as he still protested his innocence, Michaud found a way for him to talk about his crimes without actually confessing or implicating himself, by discussing them within a third-person perspective. On April 4, 1980, Michaud and Ainsworth have their first meeting with Bundy, during which he discusses the abduction and murder of Linda and Healy. The day of the murder he gained entry to Healy's house and returned later that evening, not knowing if she would be home, and what opportunity he would find. He theorized how once he got Healy up to Taylor Mountain he had her undress and raped her, but was then in a position where he couldn't let her go, and had to kill her and bury her body there. Although Bundy was mostly confident, he did stutter when nervous, which was something they noticed when he talked about aspects of the murders which he made him feel uncomfortable. He did show remorse over the act of killing Linda Healy, but it soon subsided. He attempted to justify it by saying, "Well, listen you fucked up this time, but you're never going to do that again. So let's just stay together, and it won't ever happen again." After a state of dormancy, his urge to possess, to rape and control would soon surface again and he would begin to stalk another victim. He also explained how with each murder, he would feel less confusion, fear and apprehension, and the dormancy period would become less and less. 10 days later he discussed the death of Roberta Parks, and how he returned to the burial site several times, noting that each time a variety of wild animals had ravished the remains until one day the body was no longer there. The next day Brenda Ball's death was raised, and Bundy went on to describe how their initial sexual encounter had been voluntary. However, the act itself did not gratify his desire for control and he felt the need to possess her after she passed out from the alcohol and strangled her to death. Later that month, on April 30th, he described the death of Nancy Wilcox and how he had decided to let her live after the act of rape, but accidentally strangled her when he attempted to stop her screaming. Further interviews occurred on November 12, 1980, February 5, 1981, and the last on March 31, 1981, during which he would explain other aspects of his life and crimes. He explained how he lured his victims to their deaths, by a combination of luring them to his car by asking for help, while some were offered a ride and others were simply kidnapped from their bed or off the streets. He would always be polite, friendly and courteous, and sometimes wore his arm in a sling or used crutches to appear as a harmless, young man simply in need of help. He also used his appearance to his advantage, with the slightest change able to dramatically alter the way he looked. In many photographs of Bundy he appears to look different with slight weight gain or facial hair, resulting in an almost chameleon-like ability to change his features. During other conversations he talked about some of his more personal interests, such as his fetish for socks and feet, explaining, "I'm really sick when it comes to socks, they're parts of the combination to the deepest, most secret recesses of my mind." The discussions with Michaud and Ainsworth eventually formed the basis of their books, The Only Living Witness, and Confessions with a Killer, the latter of which contained the edited transcripts from their interviews. In October 1981, Carol Boone gave birth to a daughter, and Bundy was named as the father. Despite the fact that conjugal visitations were not allowed at Rayford Prison, the inmates often bribed the guards to allow them intimate time alone with their female visitors. One element to his crimes that he would not discuss on record and did not readily confess to was whether or not he committed sexual acts with the corpses of his victims. Many investigators suspected Bundy was a prolific necrophiliac who would often revisit the burial sites of his victims to engage in sexual activity with the corpses. This would mean total possession for Bundy, to have control of the victim in death. He once told Hagmeyer, "Murder isn't just a crime of lust of violence. It becomes possession. They are part of you, becomes a part of you. You feel the last bit of breath leaving their bodies. You're looking into their eyes? A person in that situation, if God, you then possess them and they shall forever be a part of you and you are forever one, and the grounds where you kill them or leave them become sacred to you, and you will always be drawn back to them." During his initial arrest in Utah, detectives searched Bundy's apartment but had failed to locate his secret collection of photographs which, if found, would have sealed his fate had they been used at his trial. However, When he was released on bail, he apparently destroyed the Polaroid photos of his victims, burning the most damning evidence of his depravity. He intended to keep these as souvenirs and told Hagmaier, "When you work hard to do something right, you don't want to forget it." Bundy was moved up to R-Wing 3 North and proceeded to keep his head down, quietly going about his business. During one evening shift on July 18, 1984, the Rayford guards decided to beat the bars, which was a security precaution that involved officers striking the metal bars of all the inmate cells with a rubber mallet, to detect any cutting or tampering. After the first cell had been checked, the wing sergeant struck the bars on cell number 2, and the cold steel hit the floor and rolled out onto the quarterdeck. They had been cut. The death row prisoner was cuffed and secured in the nearby shower cell. Then the same sound could be heard from cell number 3, which Bundy's cell. He was quickly handcuffed and the sergeant offered the wing sealed off and additional assistance was requested. It was determined only 2 of the cells were tampered with, and it was learned Bundy and the other inmate had formulated a plans to escape by taking the midnight shift officers hostage. Bundy had managed to keep 2 hacksaw blades hidden in his cell and the steel bars had been sawn through at the top and bottom, then glued back into place with an adhesive made from soap.